Hi, the purpose of this video is to show you how I recommend that you read the ebooks. I try to keep the reading assignments as short as possible. Whenever I was in school, they'd give us a whole chapter to read, and it'd be like 50 pages. And I mean, it was good material, but after a while, you're just reading to read to get through the assignment. So I try to keep things as short as possible. The first part here is probably the longest reading assignment. And so, of course, you're going to read what you normally, how you normally read. But whenever you get to some code, like what we have here with the Hello World, print Hello World, what I'd recommend that you do is open up the Swift WASM and go through here and remove everything. Now, the first statement, the import statement, the glibc, you could leave that if you want. But then you could just go ahead and type out the what was in the reading assignment. Here, hello world, something very similar to it. So we have hello, comma, world. So let me try to make that as close as possible. What we have here. Okay. And then click on run. And remember that sometimes the first time this doesn't really work real well. So sometimes, like you get no outputs, you got to click it again. And then it seems to work a little better. So there you go. Now, one of the things about programming, you got to be kind of curious about things. You've got to be willing to look at things and, want to explore things a little bit. So, if you're a little curious, you go, okay, well, all right, well, we have print world here. What about if we put a space there? Does that still run okay? Well, we give it a second and okay, let's try it again. The compiler runs just fine. So, I mean, it's possible to put a space there between those two. What about if we put an extra space at like the beginning and the end, right before and after these tick marks? What happens? All right, let's run that again, see what happens. Okay, well, seems to work okay. What about if we put something else on the end here? What happens? Okay, we get an error. This says that it's expecting a comma separator. And what that means, part of learning to program is to understand what the compiler is saying, and every compiler is different. So you'll understand, as you go through this course, you'll understand what the Swift compiler is trying to say. Now, if you go on a different program, use a different programming language, the compiler may give you back errors that are a little bit different. But as you start using more and more compilers, you start understanding what they're really saying. And so for example, this first error says error expected a comma separator. And notice that it's got this little marker here to say A there. So what it's saying is right there where that A is, it's expecting a comma. So let's just go ahead and put a comma there, and let's see what happens whenever we run it. Okay, we run it. Okay, our first error is gone, but then we've got this other error that says we've got an unresolved identifier ABC. Okay, what that means is it just doesn't understand what ABC is. We haven't defined what it is. So up to this point, with us just beginning here in Swift, we really can't do a whole lot more with this. But as you can tell, one of the things that we learned here by just playing around a little bit is that we need to add a comma there between the different items. So what happens if maybe we try to put a different string here? Let's say we put my name. Now, if you're doing this, I'd say let's put your name there instead of mine. Let's see what happens. Let it run. Oh, look, there you go. It puts my name on the end of it there. Now, for me, coming from a lot of different programming languages, I'll look at things a little differently than probably what you do. And so sometimes I start saying, okay, We're using double tick marks there, but I know some languages allow you to use a single tick mark. So let's see what happens in Swift if we just use a single tick mark. Is it going to complain, or is it going to let it? Okay, it complains. It says error, single quote string, literal found, used double tick marks. So what it's saying is we cannot use single tick marks here. We've got to use the double tick marks here. But you know, let's say that you want to write something that you're saying like Billy's World or something like that. And let's say that you want to use a single tick and then you want to say Billy's World. How's that going to work? Will that run okay? All right, there you go. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm really just experimenting a little bit with things, trying different things, seeing what works. Now, at the beginning here, I will admit it's going to be hard for you to know exactly what to try and what not to try. But as you go further through the semester and you start seeing more and more things, you'll start saying, hey, let's try this, let's try that. Let's see if this works. Let's see if that works. Let's see if we've got to have this. What happens if we do it this way? What about if we do it that way? And uh, if there's one thing I want you guys really to learn this semester is to experiment around a little bit with things. See what happens whenever you change things a little bit. Does it work? Does it, why, does it work? Why doesn't it work? Stuff like that. Now, there is some strict syntax and things that we have to follow. So, and there are ways of looking that stuff up. And that's one of the things that we learn through the reading assignments and stuff is how to write a lot of this code. Now, this first reading assignment here is just a tour of Swift, some of the stuff that we will learn in Swift this semester. Some of this stuff may not make a lot of sense at the beginning, but I want you just to kind of go through, read it, look at some of the statements that are in here, see what it says. There's these playgrounds. If you've got a Mac with Xcode installed, you could actually play around. You can download these playgrounds and use them if you don't have a MacBook, you will have to use the Swift WASM stuff to be able to do what we need, but you can do a lot of the same similar things. So like, for example, here with this, and of course you need to read this, read what it says, but I'm not going to sit here and read it, is what we do is we use a variable and a let statements to create variables. And actually we use the var to create a variable, which means a variable holds a value. Like in this case, it holds this value of 42. And then later on, we can actually change that value if we want to. And we do that by saying the name of the variable is equal to some value. And then if we want to create a constant, in other words, a value that never changes, we use a let statement in front of it. For example, if you don't want to hard code the value of pi, 3.14, all the way through your program, you can create a constant like this and then just use the constant name instead of the value you set it to. So let's look at this. I'm going to see if I can just copy and paste this. I don't think it's going to work, but it might. We may have to do a little bit of changing things around. So let's go paste. Okay, we got to remove these line numbers at the beginning. And let's run this and let's see what happens. We run it and there's no output. It does say running assembly, WebAssembly, so it did compile it, did run it, but there's no output. Why is that? Well, we have no print statements. And so down here, let's add a print statement and let's output my variable like that. And so if you want to print out a variable, what we had done before with the hello world, that was a string, and we'll talk about that in a couple weeks. I know that I'm introducing a lot of new things here, but if you just follow along what I got here, and play around with things. If something doesn't make sense, you can ask me. You know, you say, well, why doesn't this work? Here's my code. You know, what's going on here? Can you explain this to me? You know, if you want to, you can send me a message with that, and I can try to go through and explain what's going on here or why it's behaving a certain way. And every once in a while, I may not know, so I'll have to try to figure it out. So let's, after putting this print statement here, let's run this. And what's going to be printed here? Is the value 42 or is the value 50 going to be printed? Think about that and try to predict what's going to happen. So click run, see what happens. The value of 50 gets printed. Why is that? Well, it's because we first set my variable equal to the value of 42, but then on the next line of code, we set my variable equal to the value of 50. So that's what gets printed. Let's put a comma in here, and let's also try to print out my constant and see what happens. So let's run this, and it prints out 50 and then 42. Notice that the constant, my constant, is 42, so that's what gets printed out. Now we could use the previous example with the hello world, and let's see if we put a comma here and type it out, hello world. Let's see what happens. Now what I think is going to happen, it's going to print out 50 like what we see here, then a 42, and then it's going to say hello world out here to the right. So let's see if that's what happens. Okay, that's exactly what does happen. So you see what I'm doing here? You can just go through the reading assignments and just read them and get some information that way. But to really understand the material and to have a good understanding of what's going on, it's good to play around with it like this. You know, try some of the examples. Try changing them a little bit. Try to predict what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. Let's say, for example, I remove this double quote at the end. What's going to happen? Well, I'm going to predict that we're going to get a syntax error, or we're going to get some type of an error, and it's going to complain about not having a double tick mark here off at the end. So let's run that. Let's see what happens. It says unterminated string literal. And that's actually, that's compiler talk for we're missing a double quote out here. So let's put the double quote back, run it, and see, there we go. So in this video, we have talked about the reading assignments. I've showed you how to use the Swift WASM to look at some examples, take some examples out of the reading, make up some of your own examples if you want. And that's the way you're going to learn. That's the best way you're going to learn, is just be able to play around with things, see what works, what doesn't work, you know, experiment, explore. If you're going to be a programmer, there's a lot of that. You know, learn to do that. Learn to explore a little bit and be curious about things. If you do, it's going to make learning a lot more fun, and you're going to have a lot better time. All right. Thank you for watching the video.